Play from start. All right. Welcome to the Calibrate Show, guys. My name's Hunter France. We are continuing our part 3 of the Daniel 11 series, in which we're going to look at current events, and I'm going to heavily rely on my past 2 videos of Antiochus IV and some of the historical stuff. So if you haven't seen that, please go watch that, or you can watch anyone else's videos on Antiochus IV. It will all come into bear here. Okay? Stick around after the bump. Welcome back. As I said in the beginning, go and do your studying. If you haven't done that, go and watch the previous videos. That was Status Quo, a recent song of theirs of the past, decades or whatever. It's a great band, not from America. The song is Beginning or the End. Let's go straight into it. Here's the agenda for today. We're going to go over a checklist that I created. Actually, before we do that, I didn't put this on here, but I'm going to show you a map that I built of Ezekiel 38 and Daniel 11, just kind of plotted it on to kind of help us through this video. We're going to talk about the modern alliances of the northern and the southern kingdoms and the potential framework at place here. Talk about news coming about the Temple Mount, Syria's new leader, and finally, we'll come back to the checklist to discuss where we might be and where we're at. Those are the important words are might, if, potential, and maybe. Okay? Next slide. Here's your scriptures to read today. I'm going to leave these here on your screen. The ones I have highlighted and read are definitely I highlighted them. I want you guys to read these if you're not familiar. These are the same stories. Maybe starting from different beginning points, but once you get into Daniel 11, verse 21 to the end of Daniel 12, all of this is the same story. Now, in the book of Revelation, I should add, we don't read about the trumpets and the bowls in chapter 7. You can continue reading the book of Revelation, but even if you just read up to 7, that'll suffice for this video. Okay, next slide. Maybe I should pray before we do it. Guys, I'm going to go ahead and pray because what I'm doing here is something I said I would never do, but I think enough has happened in current events that I think it's starting to warrant us keeping watch, a close eye on this. It's like an alert video. So let me pray. Dear Lord Jesus, thank you for this day. Thank you for bringing us to your word so that we can know the signs that are upon us, and not just to know we ask you not just to know the signs, but what to do with them, to give us wisdom to walk in light of what is and what is to come, so that we can be those during the times helping many understand and leading many to righteousness. We ask you for your help in Jesus' name, I pray. Amen. All right, next slide, guys. All right, so here's the map I talked about. A conglomeration of Daniel 11 and Ezekiel 38. Hopefully I'm out of the way and you can see the whole thing. But you have your ships of Kittim mentioned in Daniel 11 and Tarshish mentioned in Tarshish. I don't know how to say it. Mentioned in Ezekiel 38. They're synonymous. This is basically talking about Western nations. But there's your Magog, which is in Turkey. I have a whole video about that. You can go watch. Do your studying on that. I know a lot of people put it in Russia and Europe. A bunch of other crazy places. Some unknowingly place it in the United States. That just, it doesn't make sense. The Bible is pretty clear. In fact, it's 100% clear through the prophets of Micah, Ezekiel, here, Isaiah. The Antichrist will come from the north in the Middle East. Think modern day Turkey, northern Syria, and Iraq. It's ancient Assyria all the way to Magog and even Pergamum, which we talked about in the previous video. Here's the checklist. I made this, again, from Daniel 11 and Ezekiel 38, as well as parts of Daniel 8 and maybe some other things that came off the top of my head, really. The checklist here, we're going to come back to towards the end of the video, and I'm going to fill this out. You have your green fulfilled check marks. This will be in no way, shape, or form a solidified list. This is subject to change, even the green marks, and I'll explain why as we go through, or really just at the end. You have your yellow dots, which I labeled as in process. You could also put potentially happening. And then you have your red X, which is just not fulfilled. Now, for the part 3, modern times, current events, in the last couple of years, so on your left is Bibi Netanyahu. And he's done this twice at the UN, both in 2023 and 24 last fall, where he held up these maps talking about the blessed nations and the cursed nations. And south of that red line, he labels nations that are part of the Abrahamic Accords. You can't really see, but he has India on there as well. On the right here is the Abrahamic Accords framework. Saudi Arabia is the interesting one because they're an unofficial friend of Israel. They're kind of friends under the table doing military deals and whatnot. They have been open about wanting to join this, and because of certain events, they've delayed this. And when you see headlines in the news where they're condemning Israel for this or that, you take it with a grain of salt. They're definitely friends, and we know this because of the recent events in Israel when Iran has lobbed a record number of rockets and missiles at Israel. Saudi Arabia has helped shoot them down, and pretty good number as well. There's coming a time where they're going to join this. They're going to be an official friend of Israel. It's pretty obvious at this point if you've been paying attention. The nations above that red line he calls the cursed nations, and he actually includes Lebanon. You can't really tell because I'm sure this is a little blurry, but there's your kingdoms of the north and kingdoms of the south according to what he has held up here. However, so I recreated this map, and I made a little change that you might notice. I added Turkey, and I outlined them in black. If you've paid attention since October 7th, just before that, Erdogan was being friendly towards Israel. Right after that attack, he shows his true face and what he truly believes. He has for years expressed wanting to resurrect the Ottoman Empire. He's got these Ottoman aspirations. You can read about it. He's even been open about it, and so has members of his cabinet and government for years now. And during the virus back then, he militarized in I would say, a stunning fashion. He's now the second largest military in NATO, the second largest behind the United States. And if we separate from NATO, they will be the largest military in NATO. And they're not a friendly player, guys. They're not. I don't know why they're a member of NATO. They shouldn't be. But this is essentially what you're looking at, according to Bibi Netanyahu, minus Turkey, of course. The kingdoms of the south, right there, listed, the Abrahamic Accords. What Israel's doing is they're wanting to solidify these relationships, to one, for military cooperation against some of these bad player nations north of them. So, and look, they share a common enemy. All of them share a common enemy with Iran and even Turkey. These governments in the south are going through war. So I might as well go ahead and go to the next slide here, because this right here is not reality. This is reality. Kingdoms of the south have been going through political upheaval and turmoil and even civil war ever since the Arab Spring. Now, the governments that have been mostly in control are mostly non-antagonistic towards Jerusalem, reminiscent of the Ptolemaic kingdom of history when Antiochus IV was in town. And just like back in history, these kingdoms of the south have some political unrest. When Antiochus IV came to power and he goes to war in the south and he conquers all of Egypt, he leaves Ptolemy VI as a co-regent with Ptolemy VIII, his younger brother, to set himself up as some sort of a protector, saying, I did this for stability. It was so he wouldn't alarm Rome and he would look like more of a protector and a hero, because Rome was doing business with all these lands and they didn't want any, I guess, intervention in that. It would be bad for the economy. And you see the same thing happening today. The reason I've also got them crossed in black is that on the other side of these civil conflicts, you have these proxy militias or proxy wars being fought, being supported by none other than Turkey, which is, I mean, that's something to pay attention to, because right here, being reality on the ground, the framework for a redoing of history, because remember, God says in the Bible, basically history repeats itself. And what has been done in the past will happen again. It's a popular saying that pattern is prophecy. Moving on. There's your end times scenario. This is what it will eventually look like. It doesn't look like that right now. It looks like that, but it'll eventually look like that. The reason, let me go back again. The reason I have Egypt, by the way, if you've noticed, Egypt is not crossed in black. Egypt, according to Bible prophecy, is attacked by the final beast. This is what Antiochus IV does. He does it twice. And the second time, he's opposed by Rome in the famous circle in the sand. Leave this, Antiochus, and consider yourself at war with Rome or at war with the rest. This is the ships of Kittim opposing him, Western nations. And you have the same concept today where Western nations doing business in this area can't afford for the whole thing to just blow up in war. And this is why they're always trying to stabilize the Middle East, why they tried to keep Assad in power. As bad as Assad was, what has replaced him might be worse, which we're going to get into. So there's your current climate geopolitically in the Middle East. Without all the details I could give, because this would be hours long of a video, I want to now get into news about the third temple. But rather than me talk to you guys, I'm going to bring up a video here.
Jesus made it very clear there will be a literal temple that will be rebuilt, and it will be defiled. It will be abominated, which means that it will actually be viewed in a way as holy by God. You can't desecrate something that's not previously holy. And then, of course, there'll be another temple that will be rebuilt during the millennial period. Ezekiel 40 through 48 lays that out in great detail, and other passages in Zechariah and so forth. So there's a lot of debate in the church about this, but yes, absolutely, there will be a temple. Now, I'm going to, for the sake of your audience, Vlad, I'm going to actually share something that I have not ever shared publicly. And that sounds like, oh, what's he going to say? But this is real. Like this sounds like the stuff of Christian prophecy fantasy. It doesn't even sound real. But I have a friend, I won't say his name, and he was in a meeting. I'll just say that he is a very prominent leader in the land of Israel. And a few years ago, just before COVID, he was invited to a meeting under the Temple Mount. They have all these tunnels and a whole network, a whole world down there. And he was invited. I won't say why, but there was a meeting where you had the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Sheikh Al-Bayya is the current Grand Mufti. You had a bunch of the imams from Al-Aqsa Mosque. Like, you're talking like the big heavy hitters of the whole nation, along with many of the chief rabbis, like the leading authorities within the Jewish community. And this whole meeting was to discuss, basically saying it's time to rebuild the third temple. And you go, both Muslims and Jews were in agreement on this. And the reason, because people will go, I don't believe it. Why? Well, a lot of it has to do with financial incentives. The individual family that's going to fund it has agreed to, throw, let's say, another $100 million or so at the revitalization of East Jerusalem. And it's being presented. They're not calling it the third temple. They're calling it a house of worship for all nations. But the whole discussion, the whole meeting was to discuss, how do we introduce this to the wider Arab and Jewish populations to make it acceptable? This will bring about peace between our people. There is a degree to where they're all tired of the cycle of violence. And then again, the financial incentive. But the point is this, what I'm saying right now, it's real. Like, it really happened. I wasn't there personally, but I'm telling you, the individuals that shared the information, this is like behind the scenes. There is very real plans and movements to rebuild the temple. And as you said, the Temple Institute is ready to do so. The scriptures are clear that these things will happen. And so, that was 3.5 years ago when that meeting happened.
Wow.
When will it actually happen? The point is behind the scenes. It's just like Saudi Arabia. Like, for years, I said, Israel and Saudi Arabia, they're talking, they're in talks, they're eventually going to announce normalization. And, no one believed it. And then all of a sudden it starts popping out in the news. It becomes a normal conversation. Then it happens. That's the way that diplomacy works. And that's actually what's happening with the temple.
All right. So now we're back. So as you can see, some interesting developments going on. I guess they've been going on for years now. I want to now move the slide to this. So if you have been paying attention to archaeology and some of the things being discussed about where the location of the temple might be, I won't get into the details. I don't really have them off the top of my head complete to give to you guys. You can go and look this stuff up. Eric Stackelbeck talks about it. There's a channel, Israel, my channel, talks about it. I couldn't find the videos I remember watching. They've made so many since then. But this image right here, if you're looking at this red circle with the red arrow and the letter C, That above there is the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And in the middle is the Dome of the Rock. I don't think it needs any introduction. What I have there with the blue rectangle and the letter A, this is where they are starting to believe that the at least the second temple, maybe, where it actually might have been. And it has something to do with a cornerstone being found from excavations and things like that. They are saying, and they do believe, that they can actually build a temple with plenty of room on the Temple Mount, that you don't have to do anything to the other temples or mosques. I always believe that something would have to happen to the Dome of the Rock and that the temple would have to be dead center. They're saying, no, that's not the case. And it's very interesting that in the book of Revelation, when John is told to measure the temple, he's then told to leave the outer court. Is this, I mean, the outer court outside of the temple is going to be given over to the Gentiles, where they would trample it for 3.5 years, or times and half the time. So that just captivates me when I look at this and when I hear the things they're talking about like that. Which brings me to the next topic. So with everything we just said concerning the map, the current climate geopolitically, and the framework being set up for the historic fulfillments of the Seleucid and the Ptolemaic kingdoms of the north and the south, and even to the pattern of the kingdoms of the south being in political turmoil and unrest and civil conflict, that the Antichrist would eventually take advantage of, just like Antiochus IV did. And the news coming about the temple, Israel and Saudi Arabia becoming friends, at least as we know, it brings me to want to talk about this man. You may not have heard, but back in December, there was an invasion. I mentioned Assad being kicked out of Syria recently. This was such an event, it caught the world completely by surprise. Egypt was really nervous about this, and there's reason for that. But this man, I'll try not to spend too much time here, because this is kind of getting into where the ultimate conjecture that I usually refrain from doing. I'm just going to give this as an alert that maybe we should keep watch, because he hasn't done anything enough yet. Maybe I shouldn't say anything. He hasn't done enough that we can truly say that this is the guy. This is one of the signs, or however you want to say it. But let me just briefly go through some prophecy about this guy. You can read on these bullet points a little bit about some of his background that I've gathered. There's more details about him that you can look up. He has a history with ISIS and Al-Qaeda back in the 2010s when they were at their height in brutality. And his claim ever since sweeping through Syria and taking control and ousting Assad is that basically he's a changed man. He's leaving his violent past. He has openly stated that he wants a more democratic government, much like what the Kurds have in northern Syria, where they have this democratic enclave, an autonomous government, yet they're not a nation that's recognized by anybody. And they're successful. Even despite being attacked by Turkey constantly, they've been successful. And he is saying that that's what he wants, a united Syria with a democratic type of government. But his rise to power is what has captivated me. And the way the media initially portrayed all of this as some revolutionary, life-changing shift to freedom and democracy. The legacy media was somewhat cautious when they would describe him, saying that, yes, he has a past, but he's claiming to be a changed man. And Syria, they would show all the clips of Syrians running the streets, for freedom, and there were tears. And understandably so, as I said before, Assad was a brutal guy leading a brutal regime. And so it's understandable and it's easy to show. But CNN even got caught in a lie, saving a guy from prison who we find out was actually a high-ranking general of Assad, or a commander or something like that. You can go and watch that video too, and how people caught on to it. Moving on, I want to move to the map real quick. He comes from this land when he invades. And just like in history, when Antiochus IV comes back from Rome, he works politically, striking a deal and a relationship with leaders in Pergamum, taking a small force, heading to Antioch, capturing Antioch, and then from there he would go southward and eastward according to Daniel 8, the little horn, solidifying his rule of the Seleucid kingdom. Well, it's not quite a one-to-one, but in similar fashion, for the last few years, as Al-Jilani has been kind of regulated to the province of Idlib along with his organization, the only nation he has received support from financially and with supplies has been the nation of Turkey, the historic location of Magog or Pergamum. And from there, capitalizing on, let's go to this map real quick. You might not be able to even make heads or tail out of this map. Don't worry about it. I'm going to show us a clip where things are going to be a little more clear. But he comes out of that area in the northwest, and he sweeps through Syria, which for years has been controlled by Assad. And in just a matter of 10 days, Assad is out, and this man is in. And he comes from the north, heading southward and eastward. Now, this movement stops in Syria, and I'm going to get to this when we get to our checklist. It stops in Syria, and it stops in Damascus for now. We don't know where this goes from here exactly. All we can do is speculate based on what we know currently. And that is that I talked about him talking about democracy. He's even said the West has nothing to worry about. There's a video of him in 2018 talking about capturing Jerusalem. And again, he has claimed to be changed on that. The West has nothing to worry about. Israel has nothing to worry about. He's been trying to talk peace, even enforcing peace with Egypt. This is where President Sisi, after this whole event, had to address Egypt and say nothing like that's going to happen here, guys. It's okay. We're safe. Because Egypt, as I have said, has this undercurrent of rebellion where there is a threat almost constantly against the current government in Egypt. And recently there was a guy who, I wonder if I'll show a picture. I might not. But there was a guy who in Syria, a follower of Al-Jilani, called for an uprising similar to what we see here in Egypt. And then he was immediately arrested by Al-Jilani and put in prison. And whether that's a PR stunt or whether that's genuine, I'm not going to speculate to that. I don't want to go too far with this. I was hesitant to do this anyway. I'm even fumbling over my words because I've become a very cautious person with stuff, which is why I made a checklist, which we'll get to after the invasion video, which I have lazily just put this slide in here. Hold on, let me go get it. But here it is. So November 27th is when I remember when this started. I remember waking up the 28th saying, hey, they were talking about Al-Jilani. HTS is taking Aleppo and I don't know how to say that. Marat, I think is how you say it, making their way towards Hamas. And what you're about to see is just an absolute, in real time, a lightning campaign, a modern blitzkrieg done masterfully. And as the Daniel prophet would say, that this little horn or this king of the north militaries would be utterly swept away before him. And that's literally what happens here. South and east and the militaries are being just swept away. Assad's regime had no time to respond. They couldn't even organize. And they eventually just started leaving their weapons and just fleeing, some of them defecting and switching sides. Assad's regime and military, just in a matter of like a week and a half, swept away completely. So check this out. All right, again. So we're back to this information that you guys can read. I won't take the time to really discuss it too much. I challenge you guys to go and just kind of look at some of the history behind this and what's being said about the man, both in legacy media and other sources that have a pretty good pulse on the Middle East and what's actually happening. I will just say that this guy is a slick dude. He gets politics, man. He knows exactly what to say. He doesn't stutter. He's very good he's a good orator. Much like Hitler was. The dude is elegant as he speaks. You'd be forgiven if you mistook him for some sort of biblical prophet that was a peaceful guy. If you didn't have translations and you didn't know language, the guy's very good at this. And he's been doing this a while. You can tell he's been practicing, man. And he has set himself up with humble beginnings. He claims that his time with Al-Qaeda and ISIS, that he was just a young man thinking that this was a good cause, and that when he got there, basically it was more violent than he thought and it wasn't good, and that's why he defected and created his own organization. But really, guys, if you really look a little deeper, it might just be a rebranding. And this is what caught my attention the most, was as they were putting this man out there in the main news, the mainstream and the big world news stations, it's like suddenly things just went quiet. And if you do a little bit of digging, if you follow some people on X or some of the social medias, there were images and videos coming out of ISIS black flags being flown in Damascus after he takes power. The signs are not pointing to this being a good thing, but right now we can't really say 100% accurate that it is or isn't. I'm just saying we need to look. So let me get to our final slide here, which is the checklist. So getting into our checklist here, I'm going to start with Al-Jilani, okay? And then I'm going to work my way into some other things that have not happened yet, which is why we can't actually confirm that he is this or that. But what he has done, and again, this could be a blip on the radar, guys. Some people, I think, here in the West think that when Bible prophecy is fulfilled, that's like ultimately the fulfillment and it's never going to happen again. But that's actually not biblical prophecy. Pattern is prophecy, as I've said, and I'm going to reiterate it. God tells us in his word that as things have been, they will be again. Things will repeat themselves. There's nothing new under the sun. So, things he has done. He has arisen with a small people, coming out of that small province, and even beforehand. He has propped himself up as this humble beginnings guy. He comes from the north, having done some political business and some trade and stuff with the ancient land of Pergamum or Magog, modern-day Turkey. His military swept through Syria, as we saw, in just blitzkrieg. And he goes southward and eastward, even though I have that dot as yellow, and I'll explain in a bit. He has come shattering a covenant prince, and this isn't like God's covenant with Abraham or the covenant with Israel or the covenant with the land or the new covenant or the holy covenant. When you see covenant in the Bible, it doesn't necessarily mean it has to do with any of those, because we actually have parts of the Bible where people come to covenants. They made a covenant with each other. It's a word that can be used. You can replace this with an accord, an alliance, even a ceasefire. When you see in Daniel 9 and Daniel 11 these covenant things being mentioned, it has more to do with that. Because in Daniel 9, we read that the Antichrist, he doesn't make a covenant. Some people think the Antichrist comes and makes a covenant. No, it's actually more directly states that he enforces a covenant, or he strengthens or confirms. In other words, the covenant he is supporting is a pre-existing covenant. It's not a new covenant. It's pre-existing. And this covenant prince, who I actually believe is Assad in this case, is broken. He is kicked out. Now, he's not unalived. He's hiding in Russia, but he is pushed out of Syria. He's never coming back. I doubt he will ever come back. And Al-Jilani is speaking peace. He is enforcing peace, as we discussed with Egypt. The Egyptian political unrest, it's not necessarily specified in the Bible, but again, pattern is prophecy. And during the time of Antiochus IV, that's exactly what was happening, in which Antiochus would take advantage of this, capitalize on it after his first conflict with them. Of course, it backfires. Now, let's get into, oh wait, hold on. The green, before we get into the yellow, the green over on the right, Israel back in the land, direct fulfillment of Hosea's prophecy that Jesus quotes in the New Testament, scatter the sheep, strike the shepherd and I will scatter the sheep. On the second day, I'll bring them back in the land, and on the third day, they'll live in my presence. And we're approaching that third day. If you've seen Messiah 2030, or if you watch guys like Nelson Walters and even Josh Peck, people are pointing to 2030 to 32 time frame. I don't think we've seen enough to declare any year. Let me just say that. But go and watch those. They are very interesting, and they talk about this prophecy. AOC Network has, I might just put all of these at the bottom. AOC Network has a good Hosea prophecy video as well. In fact, I think they're the best ones so far. Let's go straight to the yellow, though. Because here's where we start talking about why we can't say this other gentleman is the final beast just yet. We talked about the temple. I have it circled here, as well as peace covenant and division of land, which I push that over also peace covenant there on the left. That's the top dot, if you will. Everyone talks about Agenda 2030 or the Pact for the Future done at the UN, and they'll say this is that. It might be, guys, but we don't know yet, because when we looked at the map and we have these alliances forming, it could be something like those. It probably is the UN Pact for the Future. They have talked about separating Israel and dividing the land at the UN, and so they probably are involved, and that probably is it. But I'm going to leave it as yellow for now because I'm not 100% sure, and I don't think we necessarily can be yet. We can be really close to 100%. We could be like 90% sure, but I don't think it's 100 yet, so I left those as yellow. Coming back to where the Al-Jalani went south and east, I still have that as yellow with the word occupation as a question mark. Let me explain that too. Well, he ends his southward and eastward expansion in Syria, and it's yet to be seen again where is he going to take it to Iran? Daniel 8 seems to suggest he probably will, if this is the guy. There's more to come with that. If that happens, I will still turn this dot green. If it doesn't, but he ends up going to war with Egypt, I'll still turn that dot green. I don't think he necessarily has to go all the way to Iran. Maybe he does. I'm a little iffy on that one. We do know an alliance is made with him. We were talking about how he strikes, he comes confirming a covenant, but there's going to be other covenants made with this guy, other deals, other alliances. We just looked at the kingdoms of the north. They will come in alliance with him, with the final beast, not necessarily Jelani. If this starts happening, and some alliances have already been made with him, which is again why I have it as yellow, some of the factions in Syria definitely aligned with him. And Turkey's working with him. Will he get moved up to Turkey to rule an Ottoman Empire one day? I'm not going to say that yet because that's yet to be seen. It's yellow for now. The Southern Alliance, Abrahamic Accords framework, it's yellow because they have not finished solidifying this alliance. And is it that alliance, the end times one? Well, this all hinges on the third temple, which as we have seen, they're discussing. I have it as yellow because it hasn't happened yet. It could happen. I think we're living in a time period where it's likely to happen very soon. Maybe this year, maybe next year. This is why the incoming administration here in the United States is such a big deal, because the Secretary of Secretary of Defense, some of you guys are going to clip that, Pete Hegseth, has stated in the past that Israel deserves a third temple. And now he's going to be Secretary of Defense in what is the most pro-Israel incoming administration, I think, in the history of the United States. This is very much something to keep an eye on, because even the incoming president, I almost don't want to say his name because I feel like it'll get censored. Even the incoming president, he's the one with his administration anyway, being Kushner, the architect of the Abrahamic Accords. So it's going to be very interesting to see where we go from here. Again, that's another alert that we really need to be looking at. All of this we need to be looking at. Now, the rest I have as red. Why? Well, it hasn't happened yet. Oh, I forgot to mention this occupation, the yellow one on the left. I don't think it necessarily has to be the case that Israel is occupied before all this breaks out. The history's past, they were. The Seleucid kingdoms and the Ptolemaic kingdoms had been jostling over control over Jerusalem for quite some time before Antiochus IV. Well, Israel's been back in the land 1948 as a sovereign nation. And I don't think they have to necessarily be occupied right away. It could come a little bit later. We read here, and this is a red X I have, in Daniel 11, he takes some sort of action concerning the Holy Covenant, which is why, again, the prince of the covenant, a covenant prince is shattered. No mention of a holy covenant. But later on, after his first war with Egypt and he returns to his land, he takes some sort of action concerning the Holy Covenant. It doesn't even say against. It just says concerning the Holy Covenant. This might have something to do with the temple. This is kind of what Antiochus was going through. Go and check up on the history there. I don't think I covered that in part 2. But go and check the history there because that's exactly what happens in the past. I won't spend too much time on it. This video is getting too long as it is. But that's what the red X's are basically what we're looking for next. If Jelani is the guy, then his forces aligned with him, will eventually come into the kingdoms of the south in Egypt and wage war. And if it's not him and it's somebody else, you'll still see this at some point happen in the future. But all of this, it still hinges on the third temple. Guys, when we see the third temple, we know we're in the end times. That's according to Daniel 8. We will know it. Even John is told to measure this temple. That's the book of Revelation. So when we see this temple, we know we're there. When we see these sacrifices, these daily sacrifices, we know we're there. And it's yet to be seen whether Jelani is going to be the one that starts fulfilling some of these categories on the left. We don't know that yet. If this happens, this third temple happens, and then we see him come into Egypt, or his forces come into Egypt, I think we can very much say, at least I will, I'm going to start turning more of this green. And I'm going to start building the second part of this, the 3.5 year time of Jacob's trouble checklist, because that'll be a checklist after this one. But I think this is where we are right now, potentially where we are. I think with all the things we have discussed, the map and the temple, I will say this. If we haven't begun, we are on the razor's edge. We're right on the edge, guys. I think now is the time to be on alert and to keep watch, just as Jesus told us to a number of times in Matthew 25 especially, that it's time to start sort of planting the seeds in our loved ones. Start telling them kind of what's happening. Even those who hate you, you need to tell them what's happening. Make peace, guys. Forgive those who have hurt you. Forgive your enemies. Jesus says it so many times and how important it is to him. Forgive your enemies. Forgive those who hurt you. It doesn't mean you have to spend time with them all the time. I understand boundaries, but it's time to start telling people to just kind of be on alert, to be on the lookout, because these things are very likely to be happening and very likely to happen in the near future. And in the grand scheme of all history, a few years is a short time, guys. We could still be a few years away from the third temple, but it's looking increasingly, or the likelihood is increasing that it could happen any year. Probably this year or next. Maybe not, though. Maybe a little more. But we are definitely on the razor's edge. I think I'm 100% confident in saying that. Even 40 years to world history would mean that our kids and grandkids will definitely see it. That is a razor's edge still, but I don't even think we have that long. I'm not going to set a year on anything. It could go all the way out to 2070, what have you. But it is time to really start telling people to keep a lookout. This is very important, guys. Remember when Jesus said in the first time, when all those who weren't seeing him as the Messiah, he would say things like, "Have you not read? Did you not take the prophets seriously, guys? Did you not look at the Psalms? They're speaking of this very day. Did you not go look at Isaiah 53? He wouldn't have called it that. But did you not look at Isaiah 53? The suffering servant? You not realize that that's me? Let it not be that we're caught not paying attention. So With that, guys, keep praying, keep fasting, pray for the nation, pray for all the nations, pray for Israel, pray for the United States, pray for your loved ones, pray for your enemies. And I'll end it there, guys, with the Maranatha. And stay tuned because we are in interesting days and deeds. Indeed. I'm very sleepy. I love you guys. I'm going to go take a nap. Bye.